Hi there, good evening everybody, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you happen to be. My name is Paul, I'm also called Knick-Knack. I'm the brains behind Knick-Knack's Daily Teaser, which is a set of fun quizzes. You can find them here on YouTube, and you'll be able to answer them, should you choose to, if you visit the relevant day's post on my blog. I will try and put that up there, but if not, Google is your friend. You can look up Knick-Knack's Old Peculiar. On top of quizzes, I talk about all sorts of stuff. I've been watching a few TV shows over the past few months. I've just finished watching season 1, or season 14, of Doctor Who, the newly rebooted one with Ncuti Gatwa. Again, I'll try and put that in the corner there, but please feel free to subscribe to my channel and go exploring if you don't spot it there. I also, if, as and when I get a chance to watch a movie, I try and watch a movie, and if it's one I think you'll want to hear my views on, I will tell you what they are. About 3 years ago now, I saw the first of the Denis Villeneuve films versions of Dune Part 1, as they're now calling it, I believe. I enjoyed it. Again, I will try and put my review up there or in the end of this video. And last Thursday, or Thursday just gone, was the date I actually sat down and watched Dune Part 2. I wanted to tell you what I thought. Dune Part 2 opens with a black screen and a strange alien voice telling us that power over space is power over all. And after we're shown the opening credits, we see Princess Irulan, Florence Pugh, dictating an entry into her diary, reminding us of the Harkonnen invasion of the planet Dune in the first film, and the apparent destruction of Dune's ruling Atreides family. It also shows us that Irulan has told her father, the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, Christopher Walken, of her personal belief that Paul Atreides, the ducal heir, played by Timothée Chalamet, has survived the battle and is leading a guerrilla war against the Harkonnen occupiers. The scene shifts briefly again to show us Paul Atreides talking to his as-yet unborn sister, Alia, telling her that their father has been killed and that fixing things would be difficult. The film then shows us that this has been a dream of sorts, that Paul, alongside Chani, Stilgar, Lady Jessica, Zendaya, Javier Bardem and Rebecca Ferguson, and a small band of Fremen are just dealing with a troop of Harkonnen soldiers, encountering them, defeating them, and then making sure they drain the corpses of water before feeding the remains to the sandworms. Meanwhile, at Arrakeen, the capital of Arrakis, we see that Raban, the Harkonnen governor, Dave Bautista, is once more in charge of the fief, making sure that his workforce defeats the Fremen and gets more spice off planet, on pain of quite literal death. Meanwhile, and once the bodies have been buried, Stilgar leads his people, and Paul and Jessica, to Setch Tabra, where, as Paul is facing a mixed welcome from the Fremen, Stilgar decides to have a private conversation with Jessica to explain something of his people's beliefs to her. Stilgar explains that many Fremen will feel the pair are long-foretold figures from Fremen religious tradition. Paul fits the description of an off-world prophet known as the Lasan el-Gib, and Jessica fits the description of the prophet's mysterious Bene Gesserit mother. There's only one thing that Jessica needs to do to start the protective ball rolling. She needs to meet the tribe's own dying reverend mother and take a very, very unimportant test. Now, what did I make of Dune Part 2? What did I think of the casting, the story? Any differences between the film and the book? The sheer bloody length of the thing. Let's deal with that last point, shall we? The film's length. The first Villeneuve-directed Dune movie came in at, let me check there, 255 minutes. 2 hours 35. Just over 2.5 hours. Something that at the time struck me as intimidatingly long, even though I've seen all 3 Lord of the Rings movies. After all, I am diabetic, so when I'm watching at home, I will be frequently pressing the pause button to visit the loo. And remember, that is at home. You can imagine what I'm like watching a film of that sort of length at the cinema. I infinitely prefer to be right next to the aisle and preferably right near to the door to the toilets. But at least at home, I've got the pause button. And what's more, Dune Part 1 was well paced, well enough paced that alongside being careful about how much I drank, I managed to watch a riveting movie that was true to the original text and do so with very few interruptions. So when Dune Part 2 became available on demand, I was looking forward to watching it, but not surprised to see that it was roughly 10 or 11 minutes longer than the first one, depending on who you'd asked. It came in at some 266 minutes, so that's 2 hours 45, thereabouts. Was it a worry for me? Yes, of course it was. I'm diabetic, remember, but I don't think I should have worried. As with the first film, keeping the drinks, the water, the tea, the colas down to a minimum helps, and Villeneuve also managed to pace Dune Part 2 in much the same way as Part 1, in a way that viewers like me barely notice the length of the film. It trips along at a good pace and keeps you engaged throughout. The only other film I can think of like that, believe it or not, is actually Avatar, the original Avatar, which was quite stupidly long, but again well paced. That pacing, combined with a pause button, again, was quite a good thing. The cast of this episode are possibly another thing to focus on. Excuse me, I'm just adjusting my trousers there. The cast are possibly another thing to focus on. Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, they all return as Paul, Johnny, Jessica, and Stilgar, respectively. And alongside them, we see a return of Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, Stellan Skarsgård as Vladimir Harkonnen, the Baron, and Dave Bautista as Gurney Halleck. Dave Bautista as the Beast Raban, respectively. And again, they put in the kind of very good, competent performances I've come to expect from the original movie. Some of the minor roles are almost as impressive. Lea Seydoux, who I last saw in a couple of the James Bond, Daniel Craig movies as Margot Fenring, was very good. Granted, her role is incredibly minor, but it helps establish what the Bene Gesserit are doing and lays groundwork for any future entries in the franchise. Just as impressive were, and I'll apologise now because I know I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, was Sahela Yaqub as Shishakli, a Fremen warrior who's a friend of Johnny's. Frankly, I think they've combined a couple of characters from the original novel there, a woman called Hara, wife of Jamis, and a minor male character called Shishakli. But Yaqub's take on the combined character is both very well played and very feisty. Walking as the Padishah Emperor, as Shaddam IV, was possibly my only disappointment. Bear with me here. He plays the character very, very, very well. He's very regal and full of gravitas. And you don't hire Walken and expect a bad performance. And that's not what you get here. I say disappointing because I felt hiring him was possibly a wasted opportunity or a bad choice. The character of the Emperor is relatively minor after all. He exists literally only to be overthrown. The film effectively has used a hammer, a very big hammer, to crack a nut. Quite who else could have played the part, I don't know. There are, as I think I've tried to say, very few actors with Walken's gravity, with his authority. So effectively, I think what's happened there, and I've said this before and I'll probably no doubt say it again, is that Villeneuve has hired a sledgehammer to crack an egg, to basically do a job that he maybe needed a spoon. By contrast, Florence Pugh as Irulan was everything I think we could ask of her character, or at least this screen version of Irulan. The character doesn't appear much in the original novel. The character is a historian. Books are quoted in the chapter headings of Dune, but it's only in the last few pages of the book that she puts in a brief appearance. As presented in the book, she has very little to do compared with Hugh's version of the character. She does a lot of heavy lifting in the few scenes she's in, but still fills a lot of information in and still fills the narrator role that she has in the novel. Also worth mentioning, and thumbs up here, is Austin Butler's version of Phaedra Alpha. His simultaneously restrained and incredibly violent performance as the Baron's heir is riveting and far more watchable than earlier versions of the character from the TV show or from the David Lynch film. Butler's version is very good and very realistic to a certain extent, reminiscent of some of the customers I'd known at some of the pubs I've worked in. Would Butler win an Oscar for his role? I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. But he plays the character extremely well, and his voice is very unsettling to hear. It's very unnerving to listen to. Okay, so what about the story itself? The film we saw today, the story we got told. Is Dune Part 2 a good translation of the second half of the Frank Herbert novel? Are there differences between this film and that story? Yes, there are. Inevitably, there are differences in any piece of text translated from the book to the film. As I think the main one for me is, possibly is for me, Baron Harkonnen, Vladimir Harkonnen, Stellan Skarsgård, has been calmed down quite a bit. In the original novel, the character is something we've learned to despise. He's an aggressive, predatory paedophile in a position of authority, an unassailable position of authority. Something that the first film, back in 2021, didn't mention. Understandably, I think it wasn't especially needed for the story or relevant to the story. And mishandled could easily offend the LGBTQI plus section of the market, much as the original David Lynch version of the character did. It caused something of a stink for the gay community because he didn't look like a nonce, he looked like a predatory gay rapist. Dune Part 2, the Baron is still not the monster the book tells us he is, or not the same type of monster. At about 48 minutes into the film, we see that Raban has been summoned to the Baron's quarters and is waiting outside the door before he gets called in, summoned in. There is screaming, female screaming, coming from that door that ends with the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Female ones, dead ones. Ones that Raban spots when he's finally summoned into the Baron's quarters. And yes, this scene reminds us, again, that the Baron is a monster. But in replacing paedophilia with heterosexual violence, I wonder if the film is telling us that one type of abuse is acceptable and another isn't. That one is going to be a conundrum, I think. Another change is to Alia, Paul Mudib's sister. The character of Alia at the end of the novel is 4 years old and quite happily slaughtering injured Harkonnen troops on the battlefield. She is 4 years old physically, but mentally an adult as a result of Jessica's use of the Water of Life, the big test at the start of the movie. And it works well enough for the novel. But it's been changed for the film, where we see Jessica talking to her unborn baby bump. We see Jessica passing on messages from Alia to Paul. We see Paul talking to his sister at the start of the film in a dream sequence. And we get to see an adult Alia, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, during one of Paul's later dream sequences. Why was this changed? I will be honest, I don't know, but I suspect that not having a child actor as a main character just makes things a hell of a lot easier for director, cast, and crew. You don't have to hire a tutor or a chaperone as well as the actor or actress. You don't have to hire or have the parents along. You have much more time with an adult actor than you do with a child actor to do filming. So there's possibly advantages there, and you can get around a hell of a lot in so doing, in dropping a child as adult character. A third change is to Charlie, is to the Zendaya character. She plays it very, very well with both depth and a hell of a lot of spirit and I've used the word already in this video, a certain amount of feistiness. But she also plays the character with a lot more skepticism about Paul's decisions, the lover's decisions to take on the religious Fremen mantle that her written equivalent. She's far more skeptical of the two versions of the characters. The pair, Paul and Charlie, are as supportive and loving as they are in the original book. But this film version of Charlie has a certain amount of skepticism about what's happening. It's something she herself puts down to her northern Fremen tribe being putting far more salt on traditional Fremen beliefs than Stilgar's southern one. It's a little bit of world building there as well, but it's a little bit of skepticism too. I don't know if it's a consistently handled change. Zendaya's version of the character seems far more publicly skeptical than she is in private, but I feel generally it's a good change. It gives Johnny more agency, more independence than she has in the book. There's other minor changes throughout the film. There's an altered line here, a dropped scene there. Paul's confrontation in the book with a captured Futher Howard, for example, is gone, as has any reference to the baby that Paul and Johnny have had that gets killed in the Imperial invasion at the end of the book. I can understand all this and generally approve of the changes, as they make for a much more coherent and indeed a shorter story, thank God. About my only complaint, again, goes back to Charlie again, or at least her last scene at the end of the film. Herbert's original novel ends after the duel between Paul and Fate, and in the film that is very well done, I should add. But it's the fight that sees Paul effectively become the new emperor and accepting the marriage of convenience to Iran. The book's last lines are words of reassurance. Jessica, Paul's mother, telling Charlie that Paul's political marriage will be a sham, and that she, Jessica, and Charlie will be remembered as the real wives of their respective dukes and of the mother of their children. It doesn't quite go like that in this film version. Instead, we see Paul reassuring a distraught Charlie. Zendaya plays that well, I should add here. He reassures a distraught Charlie of his love for her before ordering the jihad that establishes his rule, something he's been trying to avoid, and arranging the sham marriage to Irulan, right in front of the love of his life. As a result, the last shot of the film is Charlie, summoning a sand ride, ready to head who knows where. I can understand why Villeneuve made the decision to end the movie like that. It helps set up a potential third Dune movie. It helps set up a plot thread for that third Dune movie, one built on Dune Messiah, the second of Herbert's Dune novels. I can understand it. I can appreciate why it's there. I can approve of most of the rest of the changes to the story in its adaptation to the screen. But that one particular scene is something I'm not pleased of. It seemed a little too downbeat for my taste, even though I know why it's there. Right, with all of that said, done and dusted, is Dune Part 2 a good film? Do it and its predecessor make for a good retelling of Herbert's original story. Yes, Dune Part 2 is very good indeed. It really is a very watchable film. Even with my complaints about Charlie's Last Scene, this film is a good one and watchable in and of itself. It is even relatively watchable, even if you've not seen Part 1. The little introduction from Irulan, from the Florence Pugh character, makes for a suitably short summary of what's gone before. It's really rather good. I hate sounding down on that, but there you go. It's a good film. Combined with the first film, Dune, both parts, Part 1 and Part 2, make for a very good retelling of Herbert's novel. Despite their length, they're worth watching. Despite their flaws, they are worth watching. Should I encourage you to see them? Yes, I bloody well should. Dune Part 2 is flawed but superb and a lot better than the second half of the David Lynch predecessor. Go watch Dune, then watch Part 2. You will have a very good evening.